Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Vishal Dahiya, and this week we will look at the recent developments in Nepal and Bhutan and its implications and effects on India's strategic interests in the region. India shares historical ties with both Nepal and Bhutan. Two-thirds of Nepal's trade is with India, and the country is heavily dependent on its larger neighbor to meet its everyday needs. For any political dispensation in Nepal which comes to power, a friendly relationship with India is a must. Nepal's other big neighbor, China, has been investing heavily in the Himalayan country in a bid to blunt India's influence. The new Prime Minister of Nepal, K.P. Oli, has recently said that he wants to deepen ties with China to explore more options and get more leverage in his dealings with India. Another close friend and neighbor, Bhutan, also enjoys diplomatic and military support from India. Dokla Plateau in Bhutan had become a buzzword last year with a 73-day-long military standoff between India and China. 2 weeks ago, senior Indian officials, including the army chief, the national security advisor and the foreign secretary, had visited Bhutan to discuss strategic issues, including the situation in Dokla region. What is the impact of recent developments in these two nations on India's strategic interests, and is the Chinese challenge becoming formidable for India in its immediate neighborhood? For a detailed discussion on this, today we are joined by a distinguished panel of guests in the studio. Let me introduce them to you, starting with Mr. T.C.A. Raghavan, former diplomat. We also have with us retired Major General Ashok Mehta, our strategic expert, and we have with us Professor S.T. Muni, Professor Emeritus, JNU. All of you, welcome to the studios in Rajya Sabha Television. Let me begin with you, Mr. Raghavan. And let's take them one by one, starting with Nepal first. If you look at the entire situation and specifically the recent political developments in the country where the communists have come to power with an emphatic victory, K.P. Oli is now the new Prime Minister. The kind of statements which have come in from the new leader, are they cause of any concern for India or a larger concern for India?
Well, I don't know how much of a cause of real concern they are. But in my view, they should not be a cause of such great concern that they become a policy input. I do believe we have to look at the larger picture of what is happening in Nepal in the context of its recent history vis-a-vis India in the last 3 or 4 years. After a considerable gap of time, there are now some possibilities. I don't say it is certain, but there are some possibilities that we may have a stable government in Nepal as a result of this left alliance. To my mind, political stability in Nepal is in our long-term interest, and we have to keep that larger ball or that larger picture in mind as we evaluate our day-to-day policies and decide what is to be done. So these kind of occasional statements vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis China are natural, and we should not give them overwhelming importance and treat them rather as part of the static which emerges from a newly established government, given the fact that it is left-oriented and is an alliance of two communist parties.
Okay, so what you're saying is that political stability is something which is a major development there and should be taken into account. Let's bring in Major General Ashok Mehta on this. General Mehta, political stability and India's strategic interests, can they be viewed in different segments, or are they closely interrelated?
Well, I would put it slightly differently without disagreeing with the basic facts that have been enumerated by the ambassador. We have to look at China's interests in these Himalayan kingdoms. You know, there was Sikkim, Nepal and Bhutan. Sikkim was the protectorate. Nepal and Bhutan had not been colonized. And if you recall, in the old days, both in terms of Nepal as well as Bhutan, our Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru had said in Parliament in 1958 that an attack on Nepal or Bhutan 1958 will be construed as an attack on India. And this was repeated in the 60s on Bhutan by Indira Gandhi.
And that's what the Peace and Friendship Treaty says.
No, So let me. So with both these countries, that is with Nepal and with Bhutan, we have treaties of peace, perpetual peace and friendship. In the case of one country, that is Bhutan, we unilaterally changed the terms of that treaty, the Treaty of 1949 in 2007, in which that treaty said, the original treaty said that Bhutan would be guided by in its external affairs for greater strategic autonomy in its internal affairs. But Article 2 of this treaty is a very important treaty which links the border disputes of India, China and China-Bhutan. And what does Article 2 of this treaty say? Article 2 of this treaty very clearly says that neither country will allow the use of territory which is inimical to the security interest of the other. And another clause that it makes, the 2007 treaty or the 1949 treaty, it talks about that whenever there is any threat to national interest of each of these countries, the countries will consult with each other. And one doesn't have the time to explain this, but Doklam, our intervention in Doklam is directly derived from Article 2 of this treaty about territory which has an inimical interest, that is Doklam. And similarly, if you look at national interests, then the stand that India took in Doklam completely flabbergasted, surprised the Chinese. The Chinese never expected that India would stand up to...
And go that far.
One other thing, and I am talking about Bhutan still, there is one element in this treaty arrangement which has not been explicitly stated. And as somebody who has worked in the 80s in Siliguri as part of this corps that looks after the defense of Bhutan, there is a defense agreement. And that defense agreement has a number of clauses to it, which includes a training team deployed in Ha, which includes infantry units going up to various places in western Bhutan. And in short, we are responsible for the defense of Bhutan. This is nowhere stated anywhere. So it's a strategic relationship, because that western the corridor, the western shoulders of the Chumbi Valley, which rest astride Doklam and go up north, if you lose that piece of ground, then the Chumbi Valley widens considerably.
So it is,
and that is why there is this great strategic linkage, which this not just this treaty, but our relations have provided for years.
Altogether. So it's of a strategic importance. Let me bring in Professor Muni on these two aspects now. General Mehta has very elaborately explained the strategic relation between India and Bhutan. But Professor Saab, we begin with Nepal now again. The question which I was putting to General Mehta, the same is that the political stability in Nepal and India's strategic interest in the region, are they interdependent on each other, or are they completely independent of each other?
See, this depends upon how the stability works out. Because we have seen, I in principle agree with the ambassador that stability is good for us, good for Nepal. But if that stability is used to erode your presence and your own relationship, then it may not be good. And it happened during the king, say from 60 to 65, when King Mahendra was very unhappy. And it was at that time that he brought in the Pakistanis in a big way. He brought in the Chinese in a big way. The first road was constructed across the Himalayas during his time because he wanted to, what Mr. Oli is saying now, that I want to have, India respond
more leverage.
Leverage vis-a-vis India. India want India to respond to me, and therefore I am using China. This is an old game in a way, but it is an old game in a new context. And the new context is that unlike during 60-65, when China was not too much interested in, meddling into the Indian affairs, China now is very much interested in consolidating its position in South Asia, including Bhutan and Nepal, which are very critical. And to a very large extent, the left unity is a part of the Chinese engineering in terms of both political and financial influences. And to that extent, even if the left unity wants to have a more balanced relationship, which Mr. Oli says in his statement, mind it, wherever the Chinese find that this balance is not suiting them, they would interfere. And this is where I can show you in case of other countries like maybe Sri Lanka, maybe Maldives, anywhere you see, wherever they see that they have a set interest now, it is for our policymakers to go deeply into what those set interests are and where do they impinge on us adversely and how can or what can we do about them. These are the critical questions. Stability per se is good, but if the stability per se is just to be used to nudge you, then probably I am not for it.
Okay, and the second one is about another neighbor, that's Bhutan. Can the same yardstick be applied to Bhutan? Because what General Saab explained, the kind of strategic ties we have, the kind of strategic interests we have, and the kind of standoff which we witnessed last year, that needs a different approach.
See, the Bhutan has, treaties are all right, and their treaties reflect the geographical situation. Both Bhutan and Nepal are south of the Himalayas. Therefore, geography is so dictated. The technology has now increased to change the geography. But there are limits beyond which you cannot play politics and technology with geography. And this is where the Bhutan problem lies. The problem in Bhutan is in the Doklam area, the Chinese are already sitting in. Now, Bhutan's problem is how to get rid of the Chinese. They don't have military strength. Therefore, they would preferably strike a deal and get some solution out of it. But if that solution impinges adversely on India's geopolitics in this area, then it's a matter of worry. This is where we had to go into Doklam and ensure that that does not really happen.
Okay.
Now, the recent consultations which have taken place in Bhutan, I think the Bhutanese are saying we are with you, but tell us how do we really get the Chinese off our head back and what can you do? We cannot fight. Can you fight to that extent? Do you have the capacity? That's why there is a very interesting combination of the Foreign Secretary, the Army Chief and the National Security Advisor sitting on the same table and discussing with the Bhutanese. So the problem right now is the Chinese assertion. Which is the problem? The problem is not of internal changes within these countries which are taking place. How to deal with Chinese assertion is an issue.
Okay, so internal, developments are not a problem. That's what Professor Muni is pointing out. Mr. Raghavan, if you look at both places, you spoke about Nepal earlier, and in Bhutan also, you've been there with the embassy for some time. But the question here is that this is not the first time, speaking about Nepal, this is not the first time that Nepali politicians or those who are in power have used the China card vis-a-vis Indian establishment. So, is that a source of, big alarm for us? Or as Professor Muni is pointing out, it's more to do with how we counter China's efforts in these two regions, specifically countries?
Well, I think it is very important that we don't overreact and see a Chinese hand behind everything which happens in Nepal in particular. Bhutan is a slightly different case, but in general, we have to rely on our own strengths. And our own strengths, and when you talk about strategy and tactics emerging out of strategy, I believe the larger point is what are the geopolitics of the region? And the geopolitics tie Nepal and Bhutan to you very, very intimately. There is no way we can change that, and there is no way, in fact, the Nepalese or the Bhutanese or the Chinese can change that. That is a reality.
Okay.
We don't have to keep driving home that reality that we are your largest trading partner, you depend on us for everything. They know that already. To my mind, a slightly lighter touch in which we identify and focus very clearly on our core interests is possibly the right approach, because this is a situation which we are going to continue to face for many years. China, the interface between India and China is going to have a very large competitive edge to it for the foreseeable future. We cannot let every situation become a crisis and then see how to deal with it or what are the different dimensions of it. I think a more laid-back approach, letting these countries also take certain choices and take responsibility for those choices, is possibly something which we should consider, rather than having an approach that I will decide what is in your interest and then try to implement that.
Okay, so a proactive approach as well. That's what you're pointing out. Let me bring in General Mehta again on this. General Mehta, you elaborately explained the strategic interest and the relationship between India and Bhutan. When we talk about Nepal, one very important factor here is that both countries share a long, open border. So, is that in near future can become a source of strategic or security concern for India, given the kind of internal changes which are happening there?
Let me just add one point on the Bhutan side.
Okay.
The Chinese objective in Bhutan is to decouple this relationship, this very strong bonding between India and Bhutan. They want direct relations with the Bhutanese, and they want to settle the border dispute independent of India. So decoupling Bhutan from India is their strategic objective, and therefore they want Indian troops out of Bhutan. They want diplomatic relations. This will take time, and it will depend on the tenacity and the stamina of the Bhutanese. I think India has the stamina. I don't see anything going wrong in Doklam today, because both sides, there is the Treaty of 2012, which is the tripartite treaty, which brings all three countries together. So at the moment there is a lull, but a full-scale build-up is going on in Doklam. Now, as far as Nepal is concerned, see, Nepal, in my view, this is a historic change. This is the first time in the history of Nepal that you have a merged left alliance government. A Nepali Communist Party, United Marxist-Leninists and the Maoist Center last night merged together and became the Nepal Communist Party. It has never happened before.
Okay.
They have in parliament 10 short of a two-third majority. So that's the second important thing, and this actually refers to the political stability that both my colleagues have spoken about. And the third thing is that the constitution lays down that for the first 2 years there will be no confidence motion. Now, given that political stability, as far as India is concerned, India can do nothing at the moment. In the past, we dismantled the Oli government in 2016, took Prachanda out, put somebody in. So we've done all that before. We can't do that anymore, and I think this government, after the experience of the 2015 blockade and subsequent lessons, has said to itself that we will support this government, because political stability of Nepal is good for the political stability of the region and for India. But having said that, there are certain red lines that have to be drawn.
Okay.
And the Prime Minister Oli has to keep India's security concerns right on top. And what are India's security concerns as far as I know? Firstly, that any entry of Chinese troops in the Tarai region, Tarai region is a red line. And the second is the Nepal army, and if we want to leverage our options,
he suggested
India,
a relook at that as well.
And the second thing that he said about recruitment of Nepali citizens into the Indian army. Now that, because for long the Chinese army, the PLA, has been trying to get a kind of a relationship at par with India. That will never happen. But they had their first exercise last year. The Chinese have given them 10 times more military aid. So the Chinese, so I think, in my view, the red lines are Tarai. The red line is the Royal Nepal, the Nepal army. Our security interests
are taken
care of. I don't think we should have any objection.
Okay, let me bring in Professor Muni on this. Professor Muni, on both aspects, as both our panelists have pointed out, Mr. Raghavan on the Bhutanese aspect and General Mehta on the Nepali issue. India's strategic concerns are the utmost priority for India. So, with our relationship with both nations, that is something which we should be keeping a watch for, rather than looking at what exactly is internally happening there. But yes, obviously that is going to be an integral part of it.
No, but that is the thrust of what Ambassador Raghavan said. You know, the problem is Chinese have, as I said, Chinese have their own policy towards these countries and the whole region, and they will vigorously pursue that policy, assertively pursue that policy. There is no doubt about it. They have resources to implement these policies. Some of these infrastructure projects, road and rail links, etc. Power stations are no problem because let it be there. But road and rail links have strategic connotations. They will pursue it. The question is, what is India's policy and how do we pursue it? Are we really interested in building the kind of institutions both in Nepal and Bhutan which can sustain their own autonomy and independence? That is most critical. If we have been, to my mind, business as usual will not do. We have utterly failed on what I call the delivery deficit, that whatever you promise, you do not deliver on time.
Okay.
We have not taken, even in Nepal for instance, you look at the total assistance which we have given to Nepal in last so many years is much less than what it used to be. We have not taken any major project in Nepal. Partly the Nepalese have also created difficulties here and there, but after the Tribhuvan airport we built, after the Kathmandu Nepal road, India road which we built up earlier, we have not taken up any of the major projects there. Now therefore, are we linking Nepal's nationalism, Nepal's aspirations to its development? What are we contributing to this development, except for saying that we want a government which is more sympathetic to us and more friendly to us? That's not enough. That is, if that is the end of your policy, which it seems to me has been the end of the policy, that would not go. Okay. Therefore, you have to reorient, do a very serious homework. Simply muscular diplomacy like the economic coercion which we exercised on Nepal or to some extent even on Bhutan will not really help in one way or the other. And therefore, the need is for us, while the Chinese challenge is there, a part of meeting the Chinese challenge is how do you relate yourself and address yourself to the aspirations of these two countries.
Okay, so clearly it looks like, as our panelists have pointed out, that there is a Chinese challenge as far as India's strategic interest in the region is concerned, but the focus for India should be on protecting its core interests in the region and coming up with a sustainable policy with vis-a-vis both Nepal and Bhutan. We'll come back next week with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.